This is Professionalism and Ethics. We are looking at our second lecture. We're going to hear our second lecture in session 1. This lecture looks at the study of ethics and morality. It's a continuation of our last lecture. In that last lecture, we discussed some of the attributes of ethical perspectives, meaning that they're socially constructed, they tend to change over time, they change by context, they're often contested or debated, and they're also influenced by social forces, meaning those money, power, and position tend to influence the development of ethics and acceptable values in a particular society. In this lecture, in the last lecture we also looked at 3 contexts for the study of ethics, and we looked at a personal sphere, a societal sphere, and then the sphere of criminal justice. In this lecture, we're going to look more at why we study ethics and what the study of ethics can do, and how we study ethics. First of all, why do we study ethics? One reason is to help us clarify what our own values are. I think this is particularly important for CJ majors and for young adults. And for older adults who might be in the class, to come to terms with what we believe, to self-reflect enough to determine if those beliefs are consistent, and how those beliefs relate to behavior. So they help us understand and classify our own personal ethic. They help us, we also study ethics to understand the historical ideas that shape our own moral values. Oftentimes we think, and I hear this a lot from students in face-to-face classes, I follow my own ideas, I know who I am, and I kind of independently assess my own behavior. They say something to that effect. But actually, nothing is really new under the sun, and many of our ideas have a long history of being expressed, and we have absorbed them through social interactions. So in a way, everything new is really old in that regard. We also reflect upon those values and positions, and we refine them through critical reflection, meaning that we study ethics in order to test our own values. Sorry, my dog is going a little crazy. So we want to be able to question our own values and determine whether they're consistent. If they're not consistent, if we can't legitimately argue that position, if it's not based on some reasonable expectation of what a good value might be, then we need to change those values. We need to change those positions that we hold. We also study ethics to be able to articulate and defend our moral positions intellectually. We want to move beyond, well, I believe, to begin to think about why I believe and what that belief means to me. Again, we need to look at those inconsistencies, those biases, and those subjective assumptions that undergird many of our values and our behaviors. So how do we study ethics, or how do we develop ethical answers? If ethics is the study of right and wrong, good and bad, then we have to make some assumptions before we can begin to study it. There are some ideas that undergird the study of ethics. First of all, the study of ethics and morality isn't prescriptive, meaning that it doesn't tell us necessarily what to do before we act. The study of ethics doesn't necessarily present us with a list of right and wrongs. It helps us develop what might be right and wrong. So it's not like the 10 Commandments in that regard. It doesn't list what we do and what we don't do. It's more of a process of analysis about what might be right and what might be good. It's not scientific. We don't test hypotheses, we don't collect data, we don't crunch numbers, we don't necessarily have objective findings, if we believe that all findings are objective to begin with. But we're not testing to find a scientific fact. In fact, we only use facts to develop ethical positions. and then we reason from them qualitatively what we might believe is a good value or a just value. We try to develop theory or foundations of theory that we might broaden or apply to all situations. We try to see how our values can remain consistent over time and in various situations. This is part of what was in the last slide about inconsistencies in our value response. And I think this is a point well made in the book, that we can be very ethical in some situations, but then act unethically in others. So we want to know if our idea is to be honest, how do we apply that value of honesty across all situations? Okay, so there are 5 goals presented in your book for exploring ethics. The first is to be open to thinking about new things in a new way. This is very challenging, I think. I mentioned that I kind of post on Huffington Post. Most of the time when people post comments, they're already entrenched in a particular position. It's a rare instance when you run across somebody that actually wants to discuss the topic. They just want to tell you what they think. Being open means I'm not just interested in telling you what I think. I'm interested in starting a dialogue about this issue. I'm willing to listen to new ideas. I'm willing to take on a challenge of thinking about a controversial issue in a new way. I'm open to learning about new ideas and new perspectives. I'm able to self-reflect enough to identify those personal assumptions that I hold, and I'm willing to give them up if I need to in order to develop a strong, consistent personal ethic and a collective ethic. Be willing to put a collective ethic in the picture. I'm willing again to put them aside. I like to call this, particularly in discussions, I like to tell students, basically be slow to take offense, even slower to purposely offend, and then be very, very quick to forgive. So when we begin to think about being open, I think that's what that really means, that we need to be very tolerant. We need to move beyond taking things personally, and we need to be very, very quick to try and understand perspectives of other people and be very quick to forgive if I am offended or if I do feel like things have become too personal. The second goal is to develop critical thinking and analytical skills. Again, this is not very easy either. There are some students who come to this very naturally, that they have a very analytical way of seeing the world. There are other students who have to learn and practice analytical thinking. It might not be a skill that comes very naturally, but it's one that we can develop and we can begin to use. This happens a lot in the media course, and I think I mentioned this before, that a lot of students in that course will see a movie only for its plot and not be able to analyze some of the hidden values in that film. Moving above the plot to analyze that film in terms of its social message is a way in which we can practice analysis. We can practice developing analytical skills. When we have analytical skills, we want to put things in context. We want to look at, again, that social world in which we interact. We have to see the interconnectedness of multiple issues and problems. We often know, too, that this can be relatively controversial. We might not all see the same things in terms of our analysis of a particular issue or a particular problem, and it often opens us up to some conflict. But that's a really good thing, to experience conflict and to sharpen our ideas against each other. I think that's an essential part of being a critical thinker. I mentioned in the syllabus that being a critical thinker doesn't mean we just criticize everything that we hear. It means, again, it assumes some openness. It assumes a way to see connectedness between different topics and ideas, and apply some ideas from, say, maybe one discipline I heard this in a sociology class. I can apply it to what we're talking about in philosophy. It's the ability to go beyond content, to see examples, and then to apply those examples to multiple situations, to see even more examples and how they might apply to broader issues. When we think more about critical thinking and analytical skills, we want to ask again, how do we think critically about a topic? Again, it's not simply being critical of every idea that we hear. And I pretty much covered this in the last slide. Moving beyond sound bites and assumptions. Too often, I'll admit, I wear my political disposition, I guess, on my sleeve in most of my face-to-face classes. I try to avoid that online, but in this situation, it provides a good example. I have an Obama magnet on my refrigerator. I have a couple, actually. One's a little finger puppet that looks like Obama with a magnet in it. The other is a political button I've put a magnet on. My daughter's friend, who's 9, came over to the house, and she started telling me how Obama's a bad president. Now, like you would expect, she's just giving sound bites. She's not old enough to really think about the presidency as an institution, think about the presidency in terms of its limits for any president. She's not really able to, in any sophisticated way, think through what she means by Obama's a bad president. Again, it's just a soundbite. Thinking critically means that she would be able to, in a methodical and systematic way, think about the information that she was giving me. Just so you know, I wasn't interested in debating politics with a 9-year-old, so I just kind of nodded and went, when she started saying this. But critical thinking requires, again, moving beyond the sound bites of an issue to really assessing what do we mean by this, and what are some of the complexities of this issue. It often demands that we confront gray areas, again, in a systematic, methodical, reasoning way. Again, we see the interconnectedness of issues. We begin to move beyond an understanding of facts, and again apply that knowledge to problems across disciplines, across life experiences. And then it also requires us to adopt the Socratic method. And the Socratic method is a particular way of approaching problems, approaching ethical issues, and we'll talk about that now. Okay. The Socratic method basically comes from a position that the answers aren't necessarily what is important, that we pose questions in order to lead to understanding rather than to find facts. We pose questions to elicit to refine our positions. We don't necessarily ask questions so that we can find facts that tell us what to know. In fact, one of the branches of philosophy looks at how we know what's good and valuable. So who was Socrates? He was a Greek philosopher, 469 BC to 399. You might know that he was punished by execution. Basically, he was forced to drink hemlock, and therefore he died because of some of his ideas and his teaching style. He would argue that a proposition is presented in terms of his teaching. He would present a proposition, and then he would expect questions regarding the proposition and challenges to that proposition. It was less about teaching particular content and more about encouraging discussion, critique, and an analysis of the topic at hand. Anytime a new proposition is developed, he believed that additional questions come from that particular position. So this is called a dialectic approach. Now, some of you are familiar with this if you've had me for criminology or crime in the media. But basically, a dialectic approach means that for every position that's considered or every position that one takes, there are inherent problems in that position that also need to be solved. For every question that's answered, new questions develop from the answer. Nothing is actually solved. We only come to knowing about the world through the questions that we ask. An example of this might be global warming. One of the criticisms of the argument about global warming is not whether it is or doesn't. The answer might already be found. Does global warming happen? Does it not happen? The real question, if we come to the idea that global warming is occurring, what do we do about it? And would our solutions to global warming actually cause more problems than letting it persist? So the solutions to that particular issue bring about new issues, new questions, potentially new problems. Okay, so the Socratic method assumes that questions are always more important than the answers. Okay, goal number 3 is to become personally responsible in making our personal ethic consistent. It also means that we're personally responsible for taking on the duty of self-reflection, that we pay attention to how we act, we pay attention to what we believe. It also requires that we understand the criminal justice system and its role, particularly as we apply the study of ethics to the criminal justice system. We need to understand some elements of that system. First, we know that the criminal justice system is an agent of formal social control, meaning that its laws, its institutions, its particularly articulated penalties that provide the social control. That's in comparison to informal social control. Informal social control would be the influence of family and friends. I like to give the example in face-to-face classes that you go dressed for a party and your mom says you're wearing that. Why are you wearing that? You can't wear that. And that's an example of informal social control. You might be inclined to change your clothes because your mom has articulated disapproval with that particular outfit. Most of us, our behavior is controlled informally by disappointment of relatives, through criticism, through implied disapproval. Few of us actually see our behavior as controlled by the formal system, although that comes into play with some issues. And also, when we understand the criminal justice system, we need to understand that it tries to balance control of individuals with the greater good, control of individuals for the greater good against personal freedoms. This is so frequently debated now, particularly in terms of the issue of terrorism. How do we provide safety for the public and not limit personal freedoms to a great degree? It ideally provides for the ethical administration of justice, meaning that we have a fair and just system which applies to everyone. And the criminal justice system also helps us define justice itself and then consequences for particular acts which may be immoral. Okay. It also helps us develop the ability to view issues from various objective and subjective positions. It helps us understand how we know the truth. Now, how we know things, I think, is just really, really interesting. Again, most of us can say pretty firmly, well, I believe ... but we don't necessarily analyze how we come to know that. What influences our knowledge of that? And a study of ethics helps us understand a subjective ethic, one that's built upon this is just the way I feel about that topic. This is something that is a value my family has always expressed, to one that's developed from objective information. Well, what facts undergird that ethic or those values that you espouse? But the facts don't tell us what to believe. Facts are only as good, most facts don't tell us what to believe. You think about the abortion issue as an example. We know a lot about gestation, about stages of pregnancy, about the development, about conception and the development of a fetus. But those things don't necessarily, I mean, they inform our values, but they don't necessarily decide our values about that or ideas about that topic for us. So facts help us understand what happens, but they don't necessarily decide our values for us, or they don't necessarily answer ethical questions. We not only try to recognize acts for consequences, but we also want to recognize acts for their rightness. Is there a right and wrong, and how do we determine that? So for Socrates, the right thing to do was expected regardless of the consequences. So you might help someone but then be punished for helping them. That would be right regardless of the consequences that you would receive. Okay, in session 2, we're going to look at various perspectives on ethical analysis, kind of the traditions upon which, or the philosophical ideas upon which more modern philosophical approaches have developed. And we're going to look at metaethics and normative ethics. Session 2 is based on Chapter 2 in your book.